taken out of context.
Taken out of context.
Taking things out of context.
Out of context.
Be taken out of context.
Taken out of context.
In the context.
We have more context.
Out of context.
Taken out of context.
That is so out of context.
And take shit out of context.
Out of context.
Deeply out of context.
You're taking it out of context.
No, hey, hold on. So we're gonna flesh this out because I don't want nobody saying we don't take things in context.
Clipped me out of context.
It was out of context.
It's hard for your words to be taken out of context.
The full context.
In a modern day context.
Tell me the context.
Another important reminder as to why context is so important. So,
under the Copyright Act of 1976, I am within my full legal right to share these following clips via photographs, video, audio, and screenshot from the public domain. The following creators allow reshare, download, and redistribution of their content, and as always, I credit them in the description box down below. Fair use, public domain, TikTok, and TikTok Live third-party license allows fair use for the purposes of reaction, commentary, news reporting, entertainment, parody, teaching, research, criticism, scholarship, and comedy. I am within my basic human right, my civil constitutional rights to share under the First Amendment to the Constitution, my thoughts, feelings, critiques, and criticisms, opinions, and expressions. The First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution guarantees my freedom of religion, free speech, free assembly, freedom of the press, and the right to petition the government and air my grievances. The First Amendment does not cover lies that amount to defamation, slander, libel, harassment, threats, targeting, bullying, cybercrimes, doxing, and any other verbal crimes. The podcast Nobody Should Believe Me, which Gypsy and her friend Bree have mentioned multiple times on TikTok Lives, finally hosted Gypsy as a guest because she reached out multiple times. As host, Andrea states, same thing she did with the Vile Files. And Tori Spelling, as I've shown you in previous videos. Andrea Dunlop is the name of the host. She put the first part of what I'm presuming is two parts, because that's typically how they do it with podcasts, especially with the ads and sponsors, on all platforms where her podcast is available, including Amazon Music. Now, I've gone over and broken down my response and my commentary and my reaction for educational and entertainment purposes to every single question that Gypsy Rose is asked and her answer to it, despite Gypsy coming out with multiple different statements and still trying to control the narrative and clap back to people in the comment section, not just on Instagram, but also on TikTok. She also says, how many feel that the TikTok era is ending? Girl, the TikTok era has slowly been ending for 5 years since they started making changes to 170 million US users and trying to force the sale of TikTok or face an entire ban in the United States for all 170 million American users. So what's going on with TikTok is not exactly the end of an era. It's a change in the app itself. But she goes on to brag about how Instagram pays really well, though, that she makes roughly $1,000 on Instagram every month. Still not wig money, but people had a very visceral reaction to Andrea. First and foremost, hosting Gypsy Rose and allowing her to lie and not asking her the real questions. For somebody who is a self-proclaimed Munchausen and Munchausen syndrome by proxy expert and in factitious disorders, just because she had an experience within her family, an expert in the Gypsy Rose Blanchard life story and crime, does make her not. She put out a statement in the comments saying, "Hi everyone. We will be heavily moderating the comment section on this post. There is no credible debate to be had about whether or not Gypsy suffered abuse. We will be deleting any posts speculating about the fact or attempting to debunk her story. This narrative not only disrespects Gypsy, but sends a horrible message to other survivors about how they will be treated if they come forward about their abuse. Any regular listener to our show will understand that the absence of a conviction of mental health diagnosis in Dee Dee Blanchard and the presence of a genuine health condition in Gypsy do not negate the existence of abuse. Thanks for keeping this space respectful. Respectfully, debate is not up to you. And respectfully, just because Gypsy or anybody else says it's Munchausen syndrome by proxy does not make it factual, does not make it truthful, does not make it what really happened objectively. This is censorship, and this is trying to control free speech. If you want people to listen to your podcast, then you don't get to pick and choose who gets to be there and what they have to say about listening to said podcast. I know this woman wants to believe that lying to doctors and faking an illness that's not really there is a sign of abuse, but that's not only inaccurate, that is dishonest and disingenuous. Yeah, it could be medical fraud, sociopathy from a very young age, or it could be Munchausen syndrome in a child, which is in fact a thing. Medical records in and of themselves is not evidence, nor is it proof of any kind of abuse. What it is proof of is that somebody was in fact dishonest to doctors or was purposely misleading doctors, not only for other means, maybe to elicit a diagnosis that doesn't exist. That could be for other reasons like disability, malingering, or fraud. Gypsy Rose still refuses to answer the basic questions that a lot of people have. And she reaches out to people that she knows would be more than happy to have her on and to placate her. But is placating and ass kissing somebody making room and space for an honest, real conversation or education? Absolutely not, because education of anybody or anything cannot happen if there's not honesty. And the only thing Gypsy Rose Blanchard is trying to do is control the narrative. She's trying to shift the public and society's opinion of her back into her favor. She's even using the hashtag truth train so that way her posts pop up anytime anybody sees or clicks on that hashtag. She's even changed her link tree, but it still says she's an advocate. And that's so funny because didn't she just say for the 100th time in 2 years that she's not going to advocate? Another circle jerk. TikTok, Instagram, order a Cameo, explore my journey on YouTube, Facebook. Yet she's trying to control all of that. About me, my name is Gypsy Rose Blanchard, and I am a New York Times bestselling author. You mean Michelle and Melissa are. I think she means to say, and I advocate for healing, accountability, and personal growth. I am the author of My Time to Stand, a memoir. It's so funny how she forgets about the other book, a memoir that chronicles my life journey with honesty, depth, and reflection through my writing. Girl, that right there is already a lie and so dishonest. It wasn't your writing. All you did was talk to Melissa and Michelle and they wrote it. I share my story, not to be defined by the past, but to illuminate the power of truth, resilience, and transformation. None of which happened, by the way. My work speaks to those navigating trauma, recovery, and the complex process of rebuilding one's life with intention and grace. That is one thing that probably pisses people off the most, especially real survivors and victims, is her trying to use us and our movement and our community to try to validate herself. I thought she didn't need validation. And in the podcast, she also does this same thing that sociopaths do by talking to Andrea, trying to borrow on her legitimacy, trying to borrow on her credibility and her experience and her so-called expertise by saying, oh, it's not like this for everybody else, but in our community, as if Gypsy is a part of any real community. Other than true crime and how to get away with murder, how to become a D-rate celebrity. She's not healed. She is not rehabilitated. She is not reformed. She is not recovered. So to sit here and say that her work speaks to those navigating trauma, recovery, and the complex process of rebuilding one's life, then why are people around you getting arrested for drugs left and right? Getting arrested for theft and fraud and altering, fabricating? Why are people around you constantly immersed in trying to numb themselves with drugs and alcohol? That fact right there in and of itself is testimony to who and what Gypsy Rose Blanchard really is and her effect, her profound effect on those people closest to her, especially when they're all worst versions of themselves for having been close to her for knowing her. She continues on, today I focus on creating meaningful conversations about healing, self-acceptance, and moving forward after adversity, whether through writing, podcasting, or public dialogue. What public dialogue? You still won't answer the real questions because you know the answers expose you. The house of cards has already collapsed, Gypsy. It's okay. You're not going to go back to prison for saying the truth. My goal is to foster understanding, compassion, and hope, especially for those who feel unheard or misunderstood. It still doesn't excuse murder. I am a mother, a partner, and a woman committed to growth and accountability. Where? I believe that people are more than the worst moments of their lives, unless it's murder and rape, then fuck off. And that real change is possible when honesty meets responsibility and time. Too bad that didn't go in your favor. My platform is rooted in authenticity, calm, reflection, and progress, not controversy. I strive to use my voice responsibly, with purpose, and with respect for both my past and the future I am building. You do know that using AI to script your content or to do your captions and your hashtags, you do know that that's going to be suppressed in the algorithm, right? Because it's not genuine, and the algorithm can tell when it's AI or that it's a chat bot. Not good at all. The fact that you use ChatGPT for everything really is evidence and proof enough that you're not being honest, because you're not even honestly taking the time to even write these out yourself as a human, from yourself, from your own heart, soul, and mind. You have to have AI do it for you, but I really hope that you know the algorithm on no matter what platform it is suppresses AI. It doesn't push it out further. Why? Because it's not original, but it's also not honest because it's not you. It's a prompt. Truer words have never been spoken than on one of her documentaries that happened very early on. And that was, I bet most people feel like they don't get the truth from Gypsy Rose. Most people that talk to her feel like they don't get the truth from her. In fact, you can tell exactly what she really thinks and feels because when she answers questions on this podcast, she doesn't even answer the question. Like about suing the doctors for malpractice and negligence to capture her abuser. Well, that would also mean that Gypsy Rose had to have been honest with DFS or doctors, and she wasn't. She says she didn't even know she was enduring abuse, but she did know enough that she could walk. And she herself was the one lying to doctors and her mom, but she knew she could walk. And she continuously lied herself to doctors. So even if there was real abuse happening, and even if DFS or doctors came every single day of the week, 365 days, Gypsy Rose was adamant nothing was happening. They weren't going to find abuse because Gypsy, first and foremost, wasn't cooperating even if there was abuse. So to put it on everybody else and doctors and DFS is disgusting because they were called and they did come out. People knew, including Dan Glidewell, others, neighbors, friends, and a lot of family, including her father and stepmother. They knew she could walk and they neglected her so much that they allowed her to sit in a wheelchair and even helped push her in a wheelchair, knowing good damn and well that she could walk. But instead of answering the real question, Gypsy goes in a circle, a word salad. Sociopaths are really good at doing that with language, with words, with vocabulary. In fact, speech is one of their biggest tools for manipulation, because without it, how would they lie? How would they convince people? She also answers a question indirectly after going in 10 different directions other than the real answer. Out of all of the things that she wishes could be different in her case, in her story, in her early life, and in her crime, she wishes her mom would have got caught. At least one lie. Go back and listen to it. That's what she says. Just one lie, insinuating that your mom didn't lie. But her reason for that is because she wants to disprove the naysayers and be able to say, see, look, I'm correct. She really did have it, but she didn't, though. And to say she did when there's no proof of it is absolutely atrocious because she died with 17 stab wounds to her body and nearly decapitated. But Nobody Should Believe Me podcast is more concerned with comments turned off due to trolling. Gypsy also says she was honored to be a guest with Andrea Dunlop on Nobody Should Believe Me podcast, where they talked about clearing up the misunderstandings and misrepresentations around Munchausen by proxy and how often Hollywood portrayals miss the reality of what survivors actually experience. Sharing my story so publicly hasn't always been easy. I wonder why. Is it because everybody keeps clocking your lies? But this conversation gave space for nuance, facts, and empathy. Okay, well, all of part one had none of that. You can be empathetic and you can be civil and compassionate and sympathetic, but still demand honesty and the truth. Gypsy, that's where you conflate people that don't agree with you with people that are being trolls or hateful or spiteful. If you want a deeper, more accurate understanding of what this form of abuse really looks like beyond dramatized versions, this episode is important to listen to. Why? You gave none of that because your story is not a story of Munchausen by proxy. It absolutely discussed nothing except for your bullshit, your crime, your prison, your drama, all the chaos and destruction around you and to people around you still today. Questions that have already been asked numerous times before. Every single podcast and interview is like the same exact layout. It's like the same script. Nobody cares about the media attention. Nobody cares what you think or felt. People want to know the real goddamn questions, and they have a right to know the answers, truthfully, since you're the one who put your bullshit in everybody's face and tried to force everybody to swallow it. Then she goes on to try to list Andrea's credentials to try and legitimize herself. The same way that they borrow a little bit of truth to tell a lie, they borrow other people's credentials, education, and years of hard work to try to legitimize themselves, to try to give themselves credibility, because she didn't do the years of education and hard work. She had 8.5 years in prison. What was she doing? Too busy writing to pay pigs, too busy falsely accusing other inmates of sexually abusing her, too busy lying to her aunts and lying to her dad and Christy for money, too busy talking about sex more and more and more, too busy trying to find a husband to be able to be paroled to, somebody that would take care of her so she wouldn't have to do the real work of getting an actual education or having to actually do any hard work. And filming 3 times a week is not hard work when you're going about your life and a cameraman is present. In fact, it's the laziest form of work because all you're doing is signing your name on a contract for money. They take care of everything else. And I did a reaction to all of Tori Spelling's podcast with Gypsy Rose, season 1 and season 2. And you will not believe how much the questions are almost exactly identical to this podcast. We haven't gotten the second part yet, but if I was to do a sit down with Gypsy, it would probably take at least 6 to 8 hours because I have that many questions. And part 1 of this podcast so far, every single thing that Andrea has asked her are same exact questions that Tori Spelling did. And I will pull it and I will compare it and prove it to you because I not only rewatched my videos on part 1 and part 2 of Tori Spelling, but I rewatched episode 1 of this one and you would be blown away. It not only feels like a repeat with just a different woman, a different voice, it feels AI scripted. And AI and ChatGPT and others like it are not an excuse for laziness. In fact, it's going to hurt your platform, hurt your content, and hurt your podcast overall in the long run because it's very much known to the algorithm. When something is a bot, when something is AI, it lacks ideas and real human touches, real creativity. It lacks uniqueness and it really lacks the originality and the emotion of a real human. And these algorithms on these platforms are certainly designed and programmed to not only spot, but to suppress AI generated captions, hashtags, descriptions, comments, thumbnails, and content itself.
As a small child, yes, she did homeschool me for a small time, but then she became, got to the point where she didn't want to anymore. And there was, she was telling the doctors in the hospital, oh, she's homeschooled. Her homeschool, we call it Angel Heart Academy and give them that information, but it was never registered with an actual school district and it was never followed up with. And so that was something that I fell through the cracks with. So it's kind of like, yes, the, school districts could have helped had I been, aligned with that, with real homeschooling or something. And then there's just other.
The thing that drives me the craziest about Gypsy Rose Blanchard when she's talking is that she not only doesn't show any proof of what she's talking about. Where's all of your educational records? Did you try to get transcripts of all of your educational records? Going back to preschool, kindergarten, first grade, second grade. Because we know that when she puts in her plea deal and accepts her guilt for taking her mother's life, she tells the judge that she has a second grade education. Then in her memoir, she says something different. Then she says something different on TikTok Live. Then it's first grade. Then it's kindergarten. Then it's she was only homeschooled for a little bit and then never again. When she says she fell through the cracks, explain how. Tell people how. Because not only does Louisiana, even going back to before you were born in 1991, have a very explicit truancy laws, incorrigibility, insubordination, but Missouri has truancy laws. So it seems like Gypsy Rose herself doesn't even know. Because from my understanding, you have to be registered to homeschool. Even if it's through the K through 12 program, there's still checks and balances that happen for homeschooling. I just turned 40. I was born in 85, and I knew kids that were homeschooled, and they still had to check in with an actual teacher every single week and still had to turn in paperwork. And you're talking, my class was to graduate in 2003. And there was extremely strict homeschooling and truancy educational laws, not just in my state, but federally speaking. So when you say you fell through the cracks, how? Explain how. What were you registered through and why didn't they do anything? Where are those transcripts for the educational transcripts? Why don't you request those now?
Because I just think, sir, you're describing a massive red flag for abuse and you did not report it. And, we've covered situations on this show, a couple of them, where children died because of doctors' failure to report abuse, that they suspected, that they knew about, that they described very accurately, like what you are describing as abuse, and you are describing a situation where you did not report it. I'd imagine that's really a hard thing for you to reflect on. And actually, you talked in an interview about that you at some point were considering legal action against some of those doctors.
I was. And the only reason why I haven't is, I was in prison for 8.5 years after all of this, sort of happened. And so in the time that I was in prison, a lot of people are like, well, you could have had all the time in the world to build your case up, but it's like I didn't have access to the internet to try to find lawyers and do all this sort of outreach and all this kind of stuff. It wasn't accessible to the fullest ability at that time. And then once I got out, it's like with everything, with the media and the documentaries, writing my book, then getting pregnant and my pregnancy, it's like life was just way too much to take on now another court case.
Like I said, that's extremely crazy because her public defender turned manager turned now not manager, but still gives her legal advice. Mike Stanfield and his law firm took personal injury and medical malpractice suits. See this bottom one right there? Medical malpractice. So she not only had this person who came up with the whole Munchausen syndrome by proxy, just because he saw that little tiny sentence somewhere in the medical paperwork doesn't make it true. Doesn't make the doctor correct, because doctors misdiagnose all the time, especially outside of their own specialty. But it's really unfair to say that this doctor was literally describing abuse and they failed to do something and then a child died because of them. No, a child died because of their perpetrator. But abuse and neglect are the same in the eyes of the law. When you decide to not be in your daughter's life for 24 years and you allow her abuser to abuse her, you're just as guilty in the eyes of the law. So you could talk about Dee Dee all day long, but you need to start talking about Rod and Christy Blanchard. You need to start talking about the Petrie family who knew Gypsy could walk and yet still saw her in a wheelchair and was helping push her around, despite and regardless knowing she could walk and was perfectly fine. All of their negligence combined holds way more weight than any alleged abuse people think Dee Dee committed or did not commit. And did you know it's not uncommon for children and adolescents to develop Munchausen syndrome, known as factitious disorder imposed on self, where they intentionally fake, exaggerate, or induce physical or mental illness symptoms in themselves to gain attention, sympathy, or care, especially from a caregiver? It might be less common than in adults, but it does happen. Children may fake symptoms to teachers, parents, doctors, and may go to extreme lengths, including actually injuring themselves. Unlike malingering, faking for a tangible reward, like missing school. This is driven by a psychological need to adapt the sick role. Aw, poor baby fell down and can't walk. Her legs aren't working. How many kids have said that at least once in their lifetime? Especially when you ask them to pick up the toys or help do chores, all of a sudden their legs don't work. Like every kid in the world has tried that. Documented cases include adolescents such as 15-year-olds engaging in medical deception to obtain hospitalization themselves. And doctors and nursing staff are not stupid. They sometimes actually admit some of these patients to see what happens when they're away from their family for 30 days or up to, so they can watch this behavior. In this case, the child is the perpetrator of their own faked illness rather than a caregiver inducing them, which is Munchausen by proxy or factitious disorder imposed on another. Risk factors, childhood trauma, abuse, or extensive time spent in hospitals may contribute to this behavior in a child themselves developing Munchausen syndrome, especially when it comes to children's hospitals getting gifts, getting presents, getting attention from doctors and nurses and hospital staffs, getting free flights and helicopter lifts, getting free money and free gifts, and getting to be a local celebrity, getting to meet celebrities, getting to go to special movie theaters and special concerts, special baseball games, being literally given awards for being a child when you're not, being a sick child, child of the year, being an adult, singing on stage, pretending to be a mentally disabled child when you're not, telling doctors yourself that you're paralyzed when you're not. And the one time Gypsy stands up out of that wheelchair and a doctor sees that she can actually stand up and walk, her mother's not in the room. Her mother's in the waiting room because she was asked to leave the room. This is already the most likely scenario for the Gypsy Rose Blanchard case. And she admits that at 19 is when her mother finally seen that she could walk because she caught her. Does that also align with when the doctor ran an MRI and found out there's nothing wrong with her and she should be able to walk? Her muscles are saying she walks. The body and science and DNA don't lie. People do. Even children. But it's really funny that she talks about suing doctors, especially that doctor, when she defamed him on national television, on mainstream media, and all these streaming giants now. In the prison confession, saying that he's lying to cover his own ass. Just to later come on this internet on a TikTok live and admit that she does have a memory where she did stand. Admitting that she was wrong and never formally apologizing or putting out a statement to that doctor for what she had said on national television. All over the entire world. But to sit there and say she didn't have time for a lawsuit when she got out and she immediately tried to sue Fancy Maselli from the Good Wives Network, which it was dismissed. But she still tried, so she did have time to take on a lawsuit. And not only that, but she had a lawyer, public defender turned manager who took medical malpractice cases. If he actually believed it was medical malpractice and this is Munchausen syndrome by proxy and that they neglected to do anything, he would have immediately filed a suit because he would have got a huge settlement out of whatever Gypsy won. That right there tells you that Mike Stanfield himself knows there was no means to file a lawsuit because there was no malpractice.
5. Keep making content.
Let me know what you think down in the comments section. I hope you all have a fantastic week and weekend. And if you liked my video, don't forget to subscribe, like, turn on notifications, and share.